to know you all. So thank you all so much for joining. And as most of you have heard, this is Giant Conversations presented by the Sequoia Parks Conservancy here in Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks. Before we get started tonight, I just want to do a quick introduction of who we have here tonight. So I'll start with myself. My name is Katie Whiteman. I am the Field Institute Director for the Sequoia Parks Conservancy, which is a nonprofit partner here in Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks. And tonight, I'm very excited to introduce you to our two panelists for the evening. We have the Superintendent of Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Park, Clay Jordan, and the Executive Director of the Sequoia Parks Conservancy, Savannah Boiano. So, hello, Clay and Savannah. Thank you both so much for joining us tonight. And so to introduce Clay, Clay has been serving as the superintendent of Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks since November of 2020. So he hasn't been with us long, but he has seen a lot since he's been here, and we've so enjoyed having him here. These side-by-side parks, Sequoia and Kings Canyon, just for everybody to kind of, for those of you who haven't had a chance to visit us out here, encompass over 8,800,000 acres across wilderness, ranging from the western foothills of the southern Sierra Nevada mountains to Mount Whitney, which is the tallest peak of the contiguous United States. These two parks are huge. They were designated as International Biosphere Reserves in 1976 in recognition of their biodiversity in alpine and subalpine environments. Now, besides managing this huge landscape, Clay also manages park operations and currently serves as a co-chair of the Giant Sequoia Lands Coalition, a multi-organizational alliance he helped establish when he first got here. So this is one of the first things Clay did, and it was so exciting. And he has aimed this kind of movement at conserving the largest trees in the world, which are the giant sequoias. Clay came to California after serving as a deputy superintendent of the Great Smoky Mountain National Park in Tennessee and North Carolina, where he coordinated day-to-day park operation at the highest visited national park. So in total, Clay brings 36 years of service to the National Park Service. He began his career as a seasonal park ranger at Mount Rainier and worked his way up through visitor and resource protection positions at Fire Island National Seashore, Cape Cod National Seashore, Olympic National Park, Shenandoah, Gulf Islands, and the Great Smoky Mountains. And now he is here at arguably, I would say, one of the best national parks. Not that I'm biased, but here in Sequoia and Kings Canyon, where he has been here since November of 2020. So we're so thankful that Clay is here. And like I've said, in his short time here, he has done and seen a lot. And so thank you so much, Clay, for taking the time tonight to join this very giant conversation as we talk about partnerships in the national parks. And also, we're lucky to have our executive director of the Sequoia Parks Conservancy, Savannah Boiano, who has been with the Conservancy for 15 years. And most recently, she has served in the role of executive director, but prior to executive director, she was also the Field Institute Director for the Sequoia Parks Conservancy. Her National Park Service career has spanned over 29 years across 3 major national parks, including Yosemite and Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks. A natural innovator, Savannah has initiated nationally recognized public programs and projects for the Sequoia Parks Conservancy. And since 2018, she has directed the Conservancy in its partnerships with Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks, and also the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers at Lake Cahuilla. So between these two people, we have a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of National Park Service experience. And I couldn't think of 2 better people to join us tonight as we really explore this topic of partnerships in the National Park Service. Now, for all of those that have joined us, I want to say thank you to all of you too. A conversation isn't complete without people to join in. So I want to say thank you for everyone for joining us tonight in this very giant conversation. As you get a chance, type into the chat a quick hello, let us know where you're from. And also throughout the evening, we want to encourage you all to interact with our panelists. Please feel free to submit your questions using the question and answer button on the bottom of your Zoom window. Be sure to use the panelist name, who you're directing your question to, so that way we know who to address the question to. And go ahead and submit those questions throughout the evening as you think of them. And we will answer as many questions as we can at the end of our conversation, starting around 6:45. But feel free to type those questions in as you think of them throughout the night. We're also going to have a series of polling questions throughout the evening where we want to hear from you all. We want to hear the answers to some of the questions we have for you. So we're really excited to continue to get to know all of you and kind of tap into the knowledge that both Clay and Savannah bring. Now, before we start into our conversation for this evening, I'm going to transition over to Savannah Boiano, our executive director, to talk about and introduce this idea of giant conversations in this lecture series. So Savannah, can you tell us a little bit about giant conversations?
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Katie. Clay and Katie, thank you so much for having me this evening on this giant conversation. So a little bit about the giant conversations and the context for these conversations. Established in 1890, Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks are two of California's oldest national parks. With 131 years of experience managing this landscape, some people expect that park staff will know it all, can solve it all, and can save everything we want them to save. And while they are superheroes who go to extraordinary lengths to protect and preserve, they really can't do it alone. They rely on all of us to help them. And one of the ways that we can begin our effective stewardship is to learn about the issues facing our parks. Sequoia Parks Conservancy invites you behind the scenes to hear the unique voices that unite in dialogue about the actions and practices to create healthy and more resilient national parks. Hello and welcome to Giant Conversations. I'm Savannah Boiano, Executive Director of Sequoia Parks Conservancy. And I've heard a saying that one good conversation can shift the direction of change forever. And after the summer in the KMP complex, I am so ready for positive change, and you might be too. So over the coming months, this webinar series will include you in the conversation about some most important issues facing Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks today. Over the course of my long career, thanks for pointing that out, Katie, it's a long career. I have talked with thousands of people about our national parks, helping them draw a straight line between their lives and what happens in a national park. National parks are where the great American conversation plays out, and Sequoia Parks Conservancy wants you to be a part of that. And we hope that you enjoy this series.
All right. Thank you so much, Savannah. I love that phrase that the national parks are where the great conversation happens. And I really believe that, as in my not as distinguished career as both of you guys, you guys are. I really do think that the national parks are really where that conversation happens, and it provides such a great platform to have those really meaningful, sometimes hard, sometimes really beautiful conversations. And so I can't thank you both enough for taking the time to set some time aside to have a conversation. Now, before we hear from our two experts tonight, I want to first start our conversation with everybody that is here tonight. And I've got a question for all of you who are in the audience, and we're going to launch our first poll. And that question is, did you know that most national parks have a nonprofit partner associated with them? So that's my first question. You're going to see that question pop up on your screen. So if you all can answer. And thank you everyone for helping Monica, who is having a hard time hearing. Looks like Denise is having that same problem. So for all of our participants in the our staff members in the background, if you guys can help some of our participants with sound, that would be great. All right, hopefully everybody had a chance to answer that question of, did you know that most national parks have a nonprofit partner? And so we're going to go ahead and display the results of that question, and let's see how many of you know. All right, so About 74% of people knew that their most national parks have a nonprofit partner. About 26% said no. And that's really, that is really what I kind of find when I talk to people about nonprofits, that, you know, for the most part, most people realize that there's nonprofit partners, but some people have no idea. So Clay, my first question for you to kind of help us all understand nonprofit partners and the partnerships in the national parks. My question for you is, can you briefly describe the history of partnerships in the National Park Service?
Yeah, and let me start off by saying I'm thrilled to be with all of you tonight, and honored to be affiliated with such a neat place that causes so many folks from around the country to carve out the time. Because I know it's not about us, but it's about the stewardship of the lands that we're charged with. And so with that, I really am honored to be with you. You know, when we talk about the history of partnerships in the Park Service, I think you could almost say NPS stands for National Partnership Service, because it really is infused into everything and always has been. In the Park Service, partnerships have served as the bedrock for conserving and managing national parks from before there was even a National Park Service. You know, national parks go back to the 1860s with Yellowstone, 1890, of course, with Sequoia, and the predecessor of Kings Canyon, which was General Grant National Park. National Park Service didn't come along until 1916, but already partnerships were a big part of it. And the earliest partnerships related to national parks were really in the form of philanthropy. And while the conservation movement came to life in the 1800s, there was little appetite on Capitol Hill for allocating monies for such a purpose, for that protection. In fact, this attitude was really embodied in a famous saying at the time by a extremely influential Congressman, Uncle Joe Cannon from Illinois, who was Speaker of the House, so right around the turn of the century. And he had said, and he promised, not a cent for scenery, not a cent for scenery. And that was just kind of where the mindsets were at among elected officials at the time. So while at that point, Yellowstone, Sequoia, Yosemite, General Grant National Parks were established by this time, they were carved out of lands already belonging to the federal government. So it really didn't cost the federal government too much to set aside this land that arguably didn't have a whole lot of other value to it, you know, in the minds of some elected officials at the time. And then there was so little money to manage them. And so they were protected by the US Cavalry at the time, to the extent that there was any protection. And I guess this was something to give them something productive to do in peacetime. And so they patrolled the parks. So already you kind of had a partnership with the Department of Defense oriented towards protection of the parks. And then almost a decade before the National Park Service was established in 1916, Muir Woods National Monument was donated to the people of the United States by private landowners, a couple who recognized the value and the need to protect these lands and to make it available to all folks, which was incredible thinking at the time. And this was followed then a few years later, around 1916, by a group of philanthropists, including the Rockefellers, who purchased and donated the lands that would eventually become Acadia National Park in Maine. And so the dependence on private donations for the acquisition and or the expansion of national parks is continued over the decades to even today, including establishment of our neighboring park just back in 2012 with the Cesar Chavez National Monument. which was established through philanthropic donation. And that philanthropy ranged from the Rockefellers donating millions of dollars for such parks like the Grand Tetons and Rocky Mountain, to school children going door to door collecting pennies to help establish, to fund, to purchase the land that would eventually become Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And while it all started with philanthropy, the gains through the partnerships just really exploded from there into other areas of supporting parks. For example, the first director of the National Park Service, Stephen T. Mather, he recognized that nobody was going to support parks on Capitol Hill or elsewhere unless people could get to them. And so he started partnering with the railroads to establish transportation lines to get people near to parks, and even in a couple of cases into the parks themselves. And then in the decades that followed, eventually partnerships would permeate virtually every aspect of carrying out the Park Service mission in just about every unit of the National Park System, from providing funding to manual labor, scientific knowledge, education, visitor services, lodging, food services, emergency services, construction, and the list just goes on and on. I mean, I can do a 360 at any spot in the park and point out the hands and the effectiveness of partnerships here, and you can do that in about every park. And while the National Park Service, and certainly here at Sequoia Kings, partners with the myriad of federal, state, tribal, local agencies, nonprofit organizations, there's special status that is afforded to a cooperating association or a friends group that are of course nonprofits, but they exist for the sole purpose of supporting their parks. And that's what we have here. And that might be a good segue, to Savannah to kind of talk about the history of this partnership and this powerful organization.
Great.
Right. Yeah, Savannah. If you can tell us a little bit about we have this long-standing tradition, like Clay said so well, that partnerships are really infused into everything when we talk about the National Park Service. But when we're talking about here in Sequoia and Kings Canyon, can you tell us a little bit about the history of Sequoia Parks Conservancy here in these two parks?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, the Sequoia Parks Conservancy started in 1940 at the request of the National Park Service. And as a matter of fact, the first, what we would call today executive director of Sequoia Parks Conservancy, was a National Park Service person, really set the tone and did the job. So kind of two hats. It was closed for a little bit during World War II, but then reopened and really focused on providing the kinds of visitor information that was really local. So, what trails and, places to go, but even more importantly was publishing maps and guidebooks so that visitors could spend their time kind of wandering at leisure for their multi-day visits here. So that early idea of educating visitors through published works like maps and books was really important for the National Park Service, because Washington, D.C. was not going to do that for them. And so that's what the partnership started out with. And then a great partnership really flexes and rolls with the needs and the visitor interest and the visitor needs, and tries to be forward thinking. And in the 1980s, there was a little bit of a shift where the National Park Service felt like, well, we need to, change where our resources are, our people are. And so would you be interested as the nonprofit partner in running the Pear Lake Winter Hut? And before the 1980s, the Pear Lake Winter Hut was staffed by a ranger. And in the 1980s, they felt like the National Park Service wanted to put that person someplace else. And the Sequoia Parks Conservancy stepped right in. This was the perfect thing. And so since the 1980s, the Conservancy has staffed the Pear Lake Winter Hut. And I call that person like a winter ambassador, because they are not only staffing a beautiful historic structure and making sure that it stays structurally sound and intact, but also providing visitor education, much like books do. And then also in the 1980s, the National Park Service had to shift staff around again and approached the Conservancy asking whether we could staff or run the tours at Crystal Cave. And so, the board considered that ask and felt like it was a really appropriate match and really fit our growing, kind of growing body of work for education, providing visitor education and experiences in the park. And so we began hosting all the tours in Crystal Cave, and we do that to this day. And it is by far the single most visited kind of place or kind of formal interpretive activity in Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks. Not to take anything away from the General Sherman Tree, of course, but it is a formal activity. So roughly 50 to 60,000 people providing visitor education there. So those are kind of some really great examples of the visitor education component. And then starting in 2015, we added something back onto the Conservancy's plate that had been on there earlier, which is a philanthropy component. So we merged a philanthropy group that also served the National Park Service, but was kind of smaller. And they, the park wanted to be more successful there, and they wanted to be more successful. And so we merged those groups together. And now Sequoia Parks Conservancy provides visitor education and experiences, and also provides philanthropic funding for special projects in the park. And it is really exciting to be able to do that. So.
Great, thank you both. Absolutely. And I love that there's this kind of, there's this long-standing history of partnerships in the park. And yet, yeah, like I just keep on coming to that phrase, like partnerships are infused into everything. And that there is this kind of swing between the parks and the partners and how we really serve alongside one another to kind of tell this great American story. And that happens in so many different ways. And it's still happening. And it's not just like Clay was saying, it's not just what happened prior to getting all the funding, getting this funding from Congress, but even just as early as 2012, land being purchased for Cesar Chavez, National Monument through philanthropic funds. And it goes to show that, these partnerships are not just a part of history, but they're still active today. And Savannah, you mentioned Crystal Cave tours. We even have a question in the chat of, what year did the tours at Crystal Cave start at this group? In the 80s, that started in the 80s, and it's still happening here in 2021. And there's this rich history that coincides with the present. And I think that is one of those great untold stories, I feel like, in the national parks, and that a lot of these organizations are working side by side with the National Park Service, but also behind the scenes a little bit to support these lands in any way that they can. And they do that in really strategic and important ways, whether it's on an operations side or a philanthropic, from a philanthropic perspective as well. So thank you both for just kind of helping us all get on the same platform on those partnerships. And now I kind of want to turn it back over to our audience and kind of learn a little bit from them and learning about their national park experience as they've visited, parks throughout the country. And my question for the group is, has anybody ever purchased a souvenir from a national park visitor center? So if we can get that poll up, if everybody can answer it. Again, the question is, have you ever purchased a souvenir from a national park visitor center? right, hopefully everybody gets a chance. Autumn, she says yes. So Autumn, if you can
I
participate in the poll.
I wish the panelists could participate. I have my souvenir right here.
Me too. I love my souvenirs. And then James Johnson says, I just collect passport cancellations. But James, those are a super important part, I think, of everybody's national park experience is getting those stamps. All right, so if we can go ahead and display, hopefully everybody's had a chance to answer that question. If we can go ahead and display the answers. All right, 93% of people said that they have purchased a souvenir from a national park visitor center. And I think that is awesome. And that goes to show really how important visitor centers are. We say a lot that visitor centers are one of the strongest kind of heartbeats in our parks. They're a gathering area for people to ask questions, share stories, tell someone about what they saw when they're out on the trail or when they were maybe visiting an interpretive display. And it's really a place where kind of memories are preserved and where the National Park Service and the nonprofit partners can really be seen at the forefront, working side by side with one another. And it's also where one of the key ways that the national or the nonprofit partners support the National Park Service in an untold way. And so kind of a fun fact for everybody that's joining today is that all the educational products in the park stores, in the visitor centers, are actually purchased by the nonprofit partners. And those things wouldn't be possible without a nonprofit partner. And so whenever you go into a visitor center and you grab your passport book to get those cancellations, like some of our participants that James Johnson said, like he gets those stamps, those books are purchased by the national or by the nonprofit partner. And, Bay talks about how she does all of her gift shopping from the National Park Service gift shops and the postcards too. And when we talk about educational products, we're really talking about helping people preserve their National Park Service memories and their stories and to be able to share that with them. And that is something that we do together. And that leads us to our next question for Clay and Savannah. The visitor centers are kind of a small where we make a big impact. But my next question for both of you, if you can both take some time to answer this, is why are the nonprofit partner organizations, in your opinions, so vital to the National Park Service?
Well, if I was to start off, I think it all comes down to capacity, and capacity in terms of funding and necessarily able to fund. And then the nonprofit support scientific research to protect them from emerging threats. Nonprofits help us to instill an understanding and appreciation in our next generation of park stewards, advocates, and supporters through environmental education programs. So important to the protection of the parks and to public lands, because we know that elected officials fund what their constituents care about. And so through environmental education, we instill that sense of stewardship for protection of our parks and our natural resources in general. Nonprofits help us maintain the historic and archaeological resources, restore natural meadows, make forests more resilient, oodles of resource management projects, help make facilities more accessible to all people. SPC, works with a philanthropic organization that is very focused on accessibility so that all people can take advantage of it. Nonprofits help support our volunteer programs, help preserve our curatorial documents, archives, artifacts. I mean, the list just goes on. And so importantly, nonprofits support those specific activities and interests that their members like to support. And so there's a nonprofit, for so many different functions. So whatever your thing is that you like to support, you can find a nonprofit for it. And of course, we can't simply function without our nonprofit partners, especially the ones that exist solely to support our two parks and the public lands down at Lake Sequoia, in our foothills. And that's what SBC does.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's, that idea of, filling the gaps to provide that stewardship and how the ripple effects of that and how important, we're kind of getting down to it is, it really does come down to that cultivation of stewards for the resource, right? And how we work so closely and integrated so well to help do that. And over a spectrum. And we always talk about how, the National Park Service and the nonprofits have different strengths. And when we leverage both of those strengths, the ripple effects and the opportunities are vast. And it really comes down to that instilling that sense of that stewardship for the places that we love. And Clay, I like that you said that there's nonprofits for everything for people, to be a member of. And we think about everybody that's joined us, tonight and has contributed to the chats and are asking questions. These people are the people who are using our national parks that are passionate about them and that want to join in these larger conversations. And it really is a place also for them to be invited into to continue that story and continue and be part of those ripple effects. And so I love that aspect of our members too. And, Savannah, transitioning it over to you of, kind of from your perspective in that same way, like in a brief way, how would you think that, why do you think that their nonprofit partners are so vital to the National Park Service?
Clay, I really appreciate your thorough answer. And I couldn't have said it better myself. But I do have a physical reminder of, I think, what I think is really important to partnerships. And I don't know, let's see if you can see this. This is a carabiner. And this is my souvenir from Yosemite National Park. And I carry my work keys on there. And, to anybody else, it's just a carabiner. And not to me. To me, that souvenir is, it's worth $1 million to me, right? It's worth all of my memories of feeling beautiful and free and rejuvenated and inspired are all held in that carabiner, right? They're a reminder of the promise of public lands and the role of public lands for everyone to serve us. And I think nonprofits really, among all of the other things that Clay really listed there, they serve to inspire and extend the mission and open up the mission of the National Park Service for all of us. And, whether it's, your little one who's got those fuzzy bears, or, older folks who are reading, Tweed's books or whatever that is, those are more than just things. They are your dreams. They are dreams that you have for future generations. And that is something that a nonprofit partner like Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks can offer in a little bit different way than the National Park Service. And so I think that is one of the important points that I want to kind of bring forward for folks. And just, to give you a little bit of baseball insider, which is when you're purchasing something in a park store, a portion of the proceeds actually go back to the National Park Service, as we've talked about here, but they go to fund very specific things. So cultural resource preservation, historic preservation, historic places, scientific research, and education and interpretation. Those four things are part of our agreement with the National Park Service, and that's where those proceeds go. And it's very directed, and therefore the benefit of the visitor. And so that, we continue to reinvest in these places. And then just briefly here is that, the partners can help not only extend the mission of the National Park Service, but extend the visitor experience here, like places like Crystal Cave. As a partner, we are able to invite the world essentially into an underground wilderness in Crystal Cave, or invite people into the Night Sky Wilderness through the Dark Sky Festival. And so that's, we extend and we complement one another. And I think it's I guess I could say, it's a beautiful dance that we do together to really make sure that everyone finds their voice and their place here.
Absolutely. I love that. Savannah, what you said was the reminder of the promise of public lands and people finding their voice, and how, we really do, complement each other in such a unique way. And we've talked a lot about the importance of nonprofit organizations and kind of the larger context of the National Park Service. But, here in Sequoia and Kings Canyon, we've got the Sequoia Parks Conservancy here in Sequoia and Kings Canyon. And we've talked and established this idea that nonprofits are really woven in, and the park partners are really infused into everything. But our next question is, and some people have, commented in the chat about some very specific things about here in Sequoia and Kings Canyon about, the fires, or, what is, the Sierra Forest health look like? And, kind of in that same spirit, my next question for both of you is, why is, the Sequoia Parks Conservancy, or what we say is SPC's role in the parks, so vital here in Sequoia and Kings Canyon? So again, we've developed this, the importance of partnerships within the larger context of the National Park Service, but really want to get down to why is it important here? What is SPC doing for Sequoia and Kings Canyon? And why is that so important in not only daily operations, but long-term goals in planning as we look to really an unknown future right now?
Yeah, and I know that there's a lot of interesting questions too, so I'll try to keep this on the shorter side. But everything I listed before, SPC does for the park, and SPC has that laser focus on our issues that are here, that are now. The visitor services that are provided by the retail stores, providing merchandise that people enjoy, that people know they're supporting a good cause. The education, whether it's the publications. One of the participants, I commented about the Granite Pathways, which is a great publication that tells a really interesting story. And it wouldn't be published, unless there was an advocate like SPC. The Dark Skies Festivals, the Crystal Cave tours that we talked about, the Sequoia Field Institute, all the programming that takes place. Saturday, I'm looking forward to going out with SPC that's hosting the annual bird count, which contributes to a body of science that's so important. And then beyond all those services and the monies and those things, I think something that's important is that SPC has the ability to be extremely adaptable and responsive to emerging problems. Getting funding for new taxpayer-supported initiatives can take years to go through. But I can simply walk across the street to Savannah's office and begin a dialogue, and SPC is able to immediately start applying their talents to the situation at hand. And the Castle Fire was a great example of that. It was a wake-up call that we need to do something dramatically different to protect the largest trees on the planet. And SPC has kind of done a retuning and a refocusing, and has been there from the start, emerging to something happening right here in our backyard right now, and something that has consequence for, I think, generations to come. SPC has the ability to establish other partners directly through commercial and nonprofit to expand the world of stakeholders, and with exercising greater flexibility than what I can do. And being able to reach out to stakeholders that they have that follow this organization. And then finally, I think just providing a perspective. SPC is an important partner to ground truth where we're heading in the good stewardship of this place that matters so much to all of us. They offer a different perspective. It is more independent, being outside my organization, and it enables us to test our thinking, and to test our thinking by folks who are pretty well informed on the issues, which makes that opinion that much more valuable. So I could talk all night about that the benefits of this particular partnership, but it's not small.
Great. And Savannah, on the flip side of that, coming as from the executive director, I love that, Clay talked about this idea of different perspectives and how we really complement each other in our different perspectives, where we realize it's not about, just two separate organizations, but our perspectives complement one another to kind of move us forward, right, in the preservation and protection of Sequoia and Kings. And from the, and we've got just a couple minutes before we want to really start the Q&A session, because we want to encourage our participants to be able to ask questions. But briefly, why would you say SPC's role is so vital to here in Sequoia and Kings Canyon?
Yeah, I think that responsiveness that Clay led with that idea of, responsive and under changing conditions. And a great example is on October 9th, there were, 3 lightning strikes in Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks that started the KMP complex. And that was October 9th. And I think by October 12th, we had a fundraising campaign, approved by the National Park Service to raise $1 million. That was a 3-day turnaround and something like that. Our park really needed it. They needed the partnership to show up. They knew they were going to need the money. We knew they were going to need the money. We knew that people all over the world wanted to be part of rebuilding and building resilience into our parks. And we wanted to invite the world into that. And a funny side, the other day, I got a donation as far away as Mongolia. So we know that, we want to offer, the world an opportunity to be here and be part of that stewardship, and to be responsive, and starting this Giant Sequoia Coalition was, way to think future forward, Clay, an outstanding way to really lean into an issue, be honest to it, and start building those partnerships. And SPC can bring in other partnerships and do what we do best, leverage our talent, leverage our stakeholders and donors, the public, to really move the ball forward to save those giant sequoias. So I think that responsiveness is really key, and addressing the future right now.
Right. Yeah, when those fires started in September, I think and coming off of the initiative that Clay had started with the Giant Sequoia Coalition after the Castle Fire, and then we were faced with another fire. And Savannah, I love that you brought up like that. Within a couple of days, we had an initiative going to not just raise money for the KMP complex fire, but to bring the world into that process. Because like everybody answered in our poll, almost everybody purchases a memory when they go into a visitor center store. Just like your carabiner that you carry around, people have those memories of Sequoia and Kings. We hear about those memories all the time when someone, visited Crystal Cave when they were 5 years old and they're coming back, or when first time they've held a sequoia seed in their hand, or the first time someone pointed out a sequoia cone, or standing in front of the Sherman tree. And everybody has those memories of that make these places special, and to be able to extend the opportunity for people to be an active part in that, I think is something that, it extends beyond the park boundaries as far as Mongolia. I had not known about that. That's amazing,
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the unique things about this partnership is that it really has the opportunity to extend the park boundaries to and invite people in. What Clay said so greatly was that that sense, instilling that sense of stewardship, and it doesn't just have to be within the park boundary, it can extend beyond. Thank you both so much. I want to make sure that we have time to answer some of these great questions that have come into the chat. And I want to just say thank you to everybody for sticking with us and sticking through this conversation. And now is the time where we really do want to invite you to ask any questions that you might have of Clay and Savannah when as we talk about partnerships and the role of partnerships and maybe your own Sequoia experience. So go ahead and submit those questions in the chat. We'll get to as many as we can. We've got about a little over 10 minutes left. So if you can, go ahead and put your questions in and we'll start answering some of these. So one of our first questions comes from Bruce, and it's for Savannah. And he asked Savannah, how do you feel, how many SPC members and supporters are located close by versus from far away outside of the Central Valley? He's in Fresno, so he's curious about the level of the local involvement versus kind of the more broader involvement.
Yeah, Bruce, way to stump me out the gate there. I can tell you that we do have a lot of local constituents. We would love to have more local constituents and stakeholders here, but I don't have that. I could send you if you're really interested in, and if you'd like to host and be an ambassador, I would love to meet new people. Our organization would love to meet new people. But I can tell you that our friends, probably the most popular states are California and Nevada. And we always want to involve more people. And so if anybody here would like to host us virtually so we can meet new people and talk about the park, or even come down to a safe event, we would certainly do that. I would love to do that.
Mm-hmm. All right, and then another question comes to us from Sharon, and I think this can go to either one of you. It's a great question. She talks about how reaching the next generation is really critical, and she asks that the Junior Ranger program and the books of each park seem really effective in that. But what else could be done to engage that next generation?
Yeah, well, I'll say, there's kind of two areas. I think there's been, I once saw a study that said, if you introduce a child something like several times and kind of give them an immersive experience in the environment at a young age, you will instill something in that child that could be with them for a lifetime. So part of it, I think, is as parents of children, is just spending time out in nature is really beneficial. The second aspect then is through the environmental education, because it's through those programs that enable kids to gain that experience, that understanding of the natural environment and the roles of public lands. So I think those go a long way, and those tend to be a major focus of our environmental education programs. I know the Sequoia Parks Institute, so we really put a lot of emphasis in reaching the next generation of those supporters.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Savannah, kind of on the same thread of that is, when we talk about, with the Junior Ranger programs or anything that we put in the gift shops, can you explain how the park kind of decides? This is a question from Beatrice, is how does the park team decide on what to stock in the gift shops? Like, how is that process? And, Clay's talked about how being very intentional. I know we also have an intentional process as well.
Yeah, that is a great question. So what happens is, first, with the National Park Service, our park has themes and major topics. And what my team does is they will go out to gift shows, or sometimes people send us samples of work, and we will, receive that sample. and then look and see if it meets, does it tell the story of a major park theme? And, is it a good quality product and a good price point? And if it meets those kind of basic tenets, then we will get together with our National Park Service colleagues and go through the various products. We get, mugs and hats and kids things and all kinds of, products. And we get together with our Park Service colleagues and they review all of the products for their quality, for the topics, for the kind of thematic alignment and topic alignment, and what story it's telling, price points. We want to make sure we have things at various price points, people, things that tell the story but are multinational and people from all over the world can relate to them. And then we also have the limited space, so will it sell? And that's where our expertise comes in. And so we choose things once things have been approved by the National Park Service. Then we go back and we go, okay, can we fit this in storage and is it going to sell? And then we'll purchase more and out it goes into those park stores.
Right. And this is a question I think that I think is a really good one for both of you as well and I think a really big question is, it comes from Phil Rosenkrantz, and he asks, what kind of measures are taken to protect the giant sequoias? And I think this is a great question for both of you because we approach it in different ways, or that's where that beauty of partnership comes into play in very different ways.
Yeah. So I would say, first of all, understanding just what is the threat, is a starter for that. And in short, sequoias have enjoyed a long relationship, healthy relationship with fire for thousands of years. And they're dependent on fire. We know that, but it's fire that is low intensity. If the fire burns really hot, then the heat can get up into the crowns of the trees where they're very susceptible, can scorch the vegetation, or can even torch those trees. And that's how we're losing sequoias in some of these recent fires. That had not been the case for thousands of years. This is a new emergence. What's causing it? It's two factors. Number one, the droughts that are associated with climate change. And so it's just like you're starting a fire in a fireplace. The drier that wood is, the greater that the flames are going to burn. So all the fuels that are around the sequoias are really dry and then can generate really large flames. And then the other part is the accumulation of fires. And a number of participants have been talking about the exclusion of fire for approximately the last 130 years. We started putting out fire. Prior to that, and we know this, we can study the tree rings and we can actually see all the fires that these 2,000, 2,500-year-old trees have lived through. And we know that naturally they were exposed to fire about every 10 or 20 years on average for hundreds of years. That changed about 130 years ago when we started suppressing fires. So that caused the heavy accumulation of fuels on the ground around the trees. And then it also caused the forest to become denser and more kind of an unnatural level of density in the forest. With those, you have a couple of folks have spoken to ladder fuels. So you have your younger vegetation that might be crowding the trees, and it enables fire to transition from the ground where we want it to be up through these mid-story vegetation trees, and especially if they're dry, to carry the flames up into the crowns of the fires that are vulnerable. So the solution to all that, and what we've been engaged in for years on a limited basis, is first of all, prescribed fire. prescribed fire is about the best thing that we can do, and when the conditions are safe, allowing natural wildfires to continue to burn and not be so fast to put them out. Of course, that is dependent on the conditions. When we're facing large droughts, we pretty much have to put out those fires typically. But the prescribed fire is really important. And then when we're not able to apply that prescribed fire, or in addition to that prescribed fire, being able to go in and mechanically thin out at least some of the lower story vegetation. We're not talking about clear cutting forests or removal of large numbers of large trees or anything of that sort, but at least being able to work on some of that lower story stuff. When you have a lot of acreage, that just takes a lot of people effort and funding, and so we have had prescribed fire programs going on since the 1960s. Those groves that we have been able to pre-treat proved very beneficial in the KMP complex this year, in that we didn't have high severity fire get into any of the groves that we were able to treat. But there are a lot of groves in the park, and so it does require the ability to treat them. Now, the bad news is over the last 2 years, the vast majority of Sequoia groves have been exposed to fire, either through the wildfires from the Castle Fire, this year's Windy Fire, the KMP fire, burned through quite a few groves, and some of them with bad consequence, in that some of them burned much hotter than what we would have liked, and unfortunately we've lost some of the trees, which is very troubling, and why we need to take this concerted effort of working together, treating these other remaining groves, and then to be able to monitor and assess the groves that have burned to see where we're at with the accumulation of fuels. And we've identified, and this may be a volunteer opportunity, we are in the process of securing funding to be able to reforest some of those areas where we lost giant sequoias in the fire, and that may not, that burn, those sections of the groves burn so hot that they may not recover on their own. So we're looking to go in there and plant some baby sequoias.
Thank you so much, Clay. And we have a lot of questions about that. How can we get involved with the parks and with the Sequoias? And I encourage everyone to please visit our website at sequoiaparksconservancy.org. We'll throw it in the chat, and sign up for our newsletter and sign up as a member. And it's a way for you to stay connected to all of the good work that is happening in Sequoia and Kings Canyon, what the National Park Service is doing and what SPC is doing, and how we're working together to meet these really critical park needs. And so there's lots of opportunities to partner and to volunteer, and we would love to welcome you into the work and bringing in like kind of what we talked about, kind of like into the fold. And you know, our nonprofits don't exist without people like you. So we encourage you to join, become a member, sign up for our newsletter, so that way we can stay in touch with you. We do really want to continue the conversation and continue to enfold you all into the conversation as well. And I think that we've got time for one more question for tonight before we wrap up. I know we're right at the end, but there was a good one I wanted to see in here is how did the fundraising go for the KMP Recovery Fund? How, as a really tangible example, is how did that go for just a recent example of how SPC supported the parks? Savannah, if you want to answer that.
Yeah, I'm so excited. It has gone very, very well. You know, we are probably 2/3 the way to our goal, and I'm very confident that we are going to reach our goal. We had some very generous donors. People donated, $100,000 at a time. and small stuff. Like I said, we've got donations from Mongolia to Russia to India, Africa, all over the place. So it's gone really well. And I think the other thing that's gone well is that, in those donations, many people have shared their memories and, are more invested than just throwing money at the problem. I would say more people are invested in being a part of, building resilience, climate resilience into our national parks, and to, and restoring access, to those visitor experiences just based on the comments alone. Almost every donation has a comment in it. And so we can tell how invested people are. And that was the other portion, is that, money is part of it, but we all have to be invested. And based on what we're seeing, the notes that are coming in with the donations, everyone is invested. And if you donated and you're online today, thank you so much. We will be applying those funds. I can share with you. Katie, do I have time to share where those funds are going? Yeah, okay. So if you, we don't have specific projects line out that I'm going to share today, but I can remind folks that the purpose of the fund is to restore the visitor experience of the natural and cultural, historic, and recreational features of the park, like this beautiful meadow behind me and that black bear. Those areas that fall within the K&P burn area that were impacted, we want to restore the visitor experience, and all of those donations, at least 90% of those donations will go to that. And then we also are going to apply some of the funding towards building greater resilience into giant sequoia groves moving forward. So these are really future forward gifts, investing in the future of our parks and future generations' experience of these people. So we promise to keep people informed as the park really has very specific projects, but it's just a tiny bit early, and maybe Clay can share that. It's a tiny bit early to say exactly what we're doing right now. They're building that plan. It's going to come out, and we will share that and keep you appraised on our website. And you can always call and ask, how are things going? So thank you to everyone. Clay?
Yeah, I think we're really excited about those funds, because we're able to really focus them on areas that is less easy to get federal dollars for. So I have various access to monies that can help me repair infrastructure, but to be able to focus on the restoration of sequoia groves and to make the forest more resilient, that is something that this is really valuable for.
And Clay, I don't know, do you want to talk about the very first project that's being built right now with the 100 or not? Do you want to do that? No? Okay.
Well,
yeah, if you want to, yeah, go ahead, Katie.
Yeah, do you want to say anything about that very? Oh no, Katie, sorry.
I was going to say we can talk forever.
Long-winded.
And I do want to respect everyone's time. And I want to invite people, if we didn't get to your question, feel free to go to our website. There's a contact system built within that website. And we would love to still answer your questions in the best way that we can. And we want to continue the conversation. And we have more giant conversations planned for early next year, one specifically around fire. And so we invite you, and also endangered species. So we have one in January and also one in February. You can sign up for those on our website. And we would love to continue this conversation. That's a great thing about conversations. They don't just, they don't end, we continue them. And like Savannah said, we literally get phone calls all the time. We love to interact with everybody. So please don't be shy and contact us. And I just want to end on a note that I saw that two of our participants typed into the chat. Malini says, thank you for all, and I can't think of a better way to end this conversation. She says, thank you for all your efforts to deal with the summer's fires and the parks and protecting the parks and the surrounding communities. And Denise, I think she says it the best when she says, thank you so much for protecting offer gratitude for protecting this park of my heart. And I love that. I think with that, we'll end this conversation. And I want to say thank you both so much for joining tonight and giving us a history of the parks and the partnerships, and sharing with us your guys' expansive knowledge of just how vital partnerships are to the National Park Service, and how we can continue that story, and how it's not just a thing of the past, but it's something that we're still growing into, and we're looking towards the future about. So thank you both so much for your time, and thank you everybody that joined tonight, and for your questions and for your chats. It was so great getting to know you all, and we hope to see you on our next giant conversation in January. So thank you all again. And as the fire has dwindled, so has our conversation. And so we're going to go ahead and end it for tonight.